Hi all. I will take the first pitch. Let me just say good afternoon, everyone, and nice to see some of you again. We're familiar with some of you from the previous sessions, and I warmly thanks Lorenzo, whom I know personally. We're colleagues and comrades from our faculty, and I'm really excited about this presentation. It was really insightful. Thank you, Lorenzo. I'm really glad we come after you in this sense. I will switch off my camera just to make sure the connection bandwidth is not overwhelmed for now. And I apologize for this, but I'm in somehow precarious infrastructural conditions in the mountains under the rain. Yes, my name is Pietro, and I am doing a PhD in Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence. I am looking at how peasant agroecological practices and imageries are reconfiguring at a sort of technoscience from below. Max is a graduate from Bologna University working on seed sovereignty, but I'm sure he will have time to introduce himself and his research right after me. The title of the presentation for today has already been read, but somehow treats the question of licenses as a space to open up reflexivity of action research from our own positionality as researchers engaging as militants in the field, in the alternative food network, but also trying to take a transversal perspective from how this transversal perspective on licenses from software hacker countercultures, so critical approaches to technologies, as well as in seeds, in the question of open and free seeds and intellectual property and biotechnology. It is a work in progress, as has been already said, and it's a project that we are carrying out together with a collective that we are also willing to introduce shortly in the next slide. I will pass on the word to Max for this.
Yes. Okay. Hello, I am Max. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I will first introduce the peasant organization that we have been working with because it makes sense somehow. I will start with Campi Aperti, literally open fields in English. It's a peasant organization based in Bologna, today composed of around 150 producers from the entire region of Emilia-Romagna. Its origin dates back to the 90s, thanks to a collaboration between peasants that had started farming in a valley in the Apennine Mountains outside Bologna, and urban inhabitants that wanted to discuss critical consumption, food sovereignty, fair trade. And so between the 90s and the 2000s, these peasants started to directly sell their products in Bologna city. Nowadays, they organize 7 markets weekly in the area of Bologna. And they are in the constant try to expand their network to put institutional pressure and to build food sovereignty and food security networks from below. So Rete per la Sovranità Alimentare, Network for Food Sovereignty, is a network composed by them and other peasant organizations of the region, as well as Genuino Clandestino, Genuine Clandestine in English, is a campaign that Campi Aperti launched in 2010 to contrast laws that equalize industrial and artisanal transformation of food. And it is nowadays, however, a national informal movement that is also in struggle for food sovereignty. So me and Pietro and the other people from the collective, called here Campi Aperti Plus because it involves also other networks, were conducting our research individually in a quite isolated way. We knew that others were researching similar topics as us, but we didn't know much about each other research. We met by chance while doing our field work, because we were attending the assemblies, the events, the celebrations, the activities by these militant organizations, and we considered ourselves militant as well. So our needs were both to share between us and know about each other's research, and to somehow we had this interest, or we developed it after we gathered the first times in the summer of 2022, about ethical guidelines for militant research that maybe Pietro can detail about, explaining you what we mean by facilitating the emergence of action research culture.
Totally. Thank you so much. I think that was perfectly clear. And it's helped me to just introduce shortly what we mean here by facilitating the emergence of action research cultures. I mean, in a way, we could have rephrased this by saying facilitating the emergence of action research agricultures, because this is a bit of an observation that is specific to the militant networks in food sovereignty and peasant agroecology in, I would say, in the Italian field at large, that culture for sort of trying to pursue symbiosis or other forms of stronger collaboration between research and militancy are lacking. Okay, in the sense, not that in the sense that people haven't been doing this or that they haven't been doing an amazing job at doing this, but the point is that, for instance, by engaging with the movement, seeing that dozens of people had been doing research over the years, but it was really not clear to me as a researcher approaching the field as a researcher, sort of building distance from the field, because I was already a militant in the network for years before turning towards, doing action research there. It was missing it wasn't visible to me. It wasn't easy to relate to a sort of journey that had already begun. And for instance, in the Association of Campi Aperti, attempts to do this were very, very weak and precarious. And there were no reference points for sort of how to establish or build on previous experiences of action militant research in this network, okay? So the point for us was not just to be doing that in our own project and then, having that sort of part just relegated to the methodological chapter and it not being of help for others who wanted to cultivate that kind of approach, but to rather a bit sort of share that space of negotiation, reflexivity, intimacy, mutual support and stuff, taking inspiration from what other collectives have been doing. I'm also been participating to Collettivo Epidemia in the past, has been doing that quite strongly in Salento, for instance. Emilia di Treveri in Italy is doing that excellently with Aree Interne, internal marginalized areas, and so on, right? So we have a long research of militant ethnography in Italy, in feminism, in meridionalismo, in operaismo, right? But it wasn't easy or fast enough to transfer that to, the early experiences of some young researchers, young scholars, okay, who didn't have so much experience with that. So we start putting together bibliographies, start experimenting with a bit of open data amongst us, sharing some interviews, see how we felt, and negotiating that step by step, okay? So we don't have time to go very deep into this now, but it's coming along in the presentation. So I think we can move on to next slide. Yes, I mean, this is just to try to lead you a bit into how, from our own individual researches, the question of licenses also emerged as relevant, and how we negotiated that together. Max, do you want to go first?
Yeah, when I speak, I put this image on, which represents two different varieties of summer wheat. On the left, there is the Virgilius variety, and on the right, another one called Ardito, which means bold in English. This is curious because these are now supposed to be old varieties of wheat, but actually they were the first modern varieties when they were introduced, which were in the 20s, and it was the fascist period. That's why these varieties have these names with about classical tradition and etc. Anyway, the point is that my master thesis research in cultural anthropology was about seed sovereignty. I got there by chance a bit, also because of a privileged positionality of mine, in a way, because I was receiving a scholarship from an institution that provided additional courses from the ones provided by the university, and one of these courses was about intellectual property on biotechnology, including breeders' rights on seeds. So the point is, who has the right to produce, exchange, and sell the seeds? The majority of agriculture in high-income countries today is based on seeds which are produced by seed companies that retain rights over them. So when you buy those seeds, you automatically subscribe a license, a proprietary license, that is more or less entirely decided by the seed company. So there is a power imbalance by the ones who set the conditions for the licenses and those who subscribe them. So this is one of the reasons why I was interested in licenses. And of course, another one is about the data sensitivity, the sensitivity of data that you gather in these kinds of research, because I cannot go in detail in this, but in certain instances, producing and exchanging seeds can be an illegal action. So if you are doing research about this, of course, you have to be aware of how you're sharing this information, with whom, what are the political claims behind this. And so these are some of the reasons that make me interested about licenses, and Pietro can tell you about his experience. Pietro, can you hear us?
Pietro, you might be
sorry,
muted.
I was speaking while muted. Terrible, sorry. Thank you so much. Yeah, indeed. I mean, in my research, there was a very inspiring text actually, which I also linked only in Italian. Unfortunately, here in the chat, I translated it together with the authors, and we're going to publish it soon also in English online. So also, if you have a blog that accepts suggestions, feel free to give us a recommendation, because we are not, I mean, this is going to be in Creative Commons, so it will have to be shared also in other, well, anyways, just I'll just cut on that, sorry. But the point is, this was an interview conducted by a sociologist together with a hacker and a peasant in this, in the valleys, in the area, in the surroundings of Bologna, drawing the analogies and the convergence between hacker, convivial technologies, de-GAFAmizing, decolonial abolitionist approach, said at large, with the agroecological practice. And so in particularly, there were analogies, strong analogies between free software and free seeds, for instance, right? So this was very inspiring in my research, and these are people that I collaborate directly with on the field, in other collectives and in their farms and so on. And I mean, this was terribly helpful in thinking the kind of political and cultural convergence besides the technical one, for instance, or the ecological space and relations that these people share. And I mean, we saw this thing also emerging more, for instance, in like in the academic literature. I also posted a paper by, well, this is the more divulgative paper, but there is an academic paper on the Journal of Peasant Studies, basically equivalent to this, the beating the bounds metaphor and practice. That I mean, of course, in the British context, you know much better than I what this refers to, but it's about the enclosure times and how the boundaries of enclosures were beaten both by, let's just say in short, policing forces wanted to enforce the enclosures, as well as peasants were contesting that. So the margins were inhabited by both these forces, and the conflict was, you know, sort of negotiated there. And this is the same. And like Maiwa Montenegro de Witt applies this to explain the sort of negotiation that takes place in the field of struggle of licenses with seeds, for instance, in the open source seed initiative, that is drawing precisely this analogy with the open software. No? But the same happens also within the sort of open software fields, within free licenses and open source, which are two different things. I'm not going to delve now much into this, but it's just to show you how this was emerging, for instance, in my research, okay? If we go on to next slide, we tell you something more about how we then sort of facilitated this research in the Action Research Collective. Yeah.
Yes. So at first, the point was that we were also interested in understanding what a license meant to us as researchers who were part of this collective, what we knew about licenses as persons part of this collective. So as we told you, we wanted to share information among us. We wanted to try to do collective research, sharing our data among us and with the and also with other people outside. So the point is, to what conditions, how do we come to an agreement on how we share information? If we think that sharing is a revolutionary act in the realm of knowledge and of writing science. And we decided that the right way to investigate this was to organize focus groups that at first were thought to be only internal to our collective. And then we decided to expand it to our networks, peasant networks that I told you about at the beginning, but also other peasant organization and also hackers and scientist collectives, because we were interested into this intersection. And so at the end, we organized 3 focus groups. 6 members of our collectives participated in them, and other 7 people not part of the collective, which were mainly at the end researchers, social researchers, microbiologists, hackers, and software engineers. So there were no full-time peasants participating in the end, but there were these kinds of other realms that were part of our networks that were interested in participating. These were the questions that we used to lead the focus groups. A very important one was the first one. What is a license for you? We gave the possibility to answer anonymously on an online pad. And let's say that somehow we reached a very wide, not even definition, a very wide understanding of licenses. We can draw a distinction between proprietary licenses, open licenses, and free licenses. In the proprietary ones, there is somebody that owns the good, the licensed good. In the open and in the free licenses, the good is not owned exclusively, it's shared, but the open one allows to make profits on derivative works that come from the licensed good, while the free licenses only allow derivative goods to be licensed in the same free way. So I hope it's understandable somehow. This distinction comes from the free software movement beginning at the end of the 80s, but it has been applied also to the realm of seeds. There is the Open Seed Source Initiative in the United States and the Open Source Seeds in German, which are based on seeds supposedly that are licensed with free licenses. So if people grow, reproduce these seeds, they can use them however they want. They just have to share them under the same free license. So this is an instance of how these words are intertwined. And then we try to discuss opinions of the participants to the focus groups about licenses, and the result is that actually we were not mainly discussing proprietary license, and even as militant researchers, we were not insisting only on negative sides of proprietary licenses, but often on the positive meanings of licenses. So something that allows us to come to agreements, and Pietro will tell you why even agreement is not a correct word to describe this process, but to protect together what we are doing. So we had, for instance, a microbiologist that deals with composts. I know that Giorgia, she has spoken here last time with Pietro, and she was making the instances of the receipts for compost. No, so you as a microbiologist, you know in how much how many fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes need to be in a compost so that that kind of compost is effective for organic agriculture. So the function of a license in this case would be to protect that composition of a compost, the name of that compost, so that it can be helpful also for other people when it is shared in an appropriate way, in a way that is respectful of this scientific attitude. The point is, licenses can have many meanings, and also somehow the choice is between, sometimes the choice can be between leaving something unlicensed in the public domain, but this could lead to appropriation or cooptation by the state or by big companies, or otherwise you can choose a public license that is still a bourgeois tool, a tool developed in the law of the bourgeois state, but at least can protect somehow the fact that the commons stays commons somehow. Yeah, I want to speak more because otherwise we don't have time for the rest, and I will let Pietro go on with this.
Cheers, Max. I think that was really helpful. I mean, this slide is just to sort of reopen up the you know, from the results, how we expanded them also in our reflections, in our discussions and exchanges with Max and others in the collective. The fact is, the license starts to become a very useful tool to think relationships between action, research, the field, and so on. So we're kind of stretching a bit the meaning of license, but hopefully, like, this is a helpful exercise for thinking reflexivity and restitution and the role of research in militant agroecology. An example is how licensing fits fits but also reconfigure partially the practice of self-certification in participatory guarantee systems. Okay, this is, for instance, an essential tool in the critical approach of campi aperti in Giardino Clandestino nodes, but also with other alternative food networks all over the world. In Italy, we also have the case of Fuori Mercato that is working with Scienza Radicata, a collective of scientists that also participated to the focus groups, for instance. And they are acting as action researchers, militant researchers, directly into the framework of PGS of Fuori Mercato. And I think that's really interesting because it's really sort of shows how frameworks of licenses are actually already being applied on this field in many ways that regulate the social relations, but also privilege of participating, the accolli, as Lorenzo was saying, not so much, and so on. Like in the case of Campi Aperti, it's a bit different how this is coming up. It's really like about regulating access to the markets in the city, because the association is organizing 7 markets weekly, which is a lot. And it's quite a big economic territory for Campi Aperti, the markets, for in comparison to other alternative food networks in Italy, so self-organized, so grassroots, and so radical, politicized. So I mean, the point is that the health of the markets really depends on the good participation and the diversity of food there, but this has to be regulated according to the needs and expectations, and also to the weaknesses of the producers and of the territories and the communities participating to the market and to the participatory guarantee system. So, because for instance, also prosumers and co-producers have a say in the acceptance of new farmers, of new food producers into the participatory guarantee system, no? So most of these farmers are not certified organically, but they're part of the participatory guarantee system of Campi Aperti. So if a market doesn't have enough bread or enough diversity of vegetable, people won't come to do their grocery there. So the market will suffer, right? But then on the same time, people will feel weak and fragile as producers because they say, oh, but this market is not functioning well. Like we cannot accept more farmers, more producers selling food here. Otherwise the competition will be too strong. But actually the shift that is happening in some interviews, we see it, or in some other exchanges, that people are starting to think, look, we have to really assume our weaknesses as the starting point of our action and of our organization. So we have to think of how we relate more and how we can socialize certain weaknesses, but protect other fragilities. And this is purely like license thinking from what we learned also in the focus groups. We can move on to next slide. I'll just take a few more minutes if there is time to go into this other slide. Do I have another few minutes?
Yeah, you can go on, but you've already gone past the 20 minutes, Pietro. So if you can wrap it up a bit, so we can.
Okay, I'm just going to wrap it up on this issue of consent. Okay, when Max was saying before, we're trying to sort of go beyond agreement. What we mean is not that it's not important to be an agreement, but that what we see is a sort of like shift in priority from how we agree in a Soviet-like cluster of people, of community, in a circle who try to make agreements about things. We move, like there's usually a consensus-based practice in this case, in this field. We move from a logic of consensus, from a practice of consensus to a more of an emphasis on consent, and how we sort of make collectively safe spaces for. Here in the slide, we say militant research and open science with reference to the work of the collective, of the action research collective we're talking to, but and together with the alternative food network. But it's the same also in the participatory guarantee system in terms of the health of markets. But this is like a really open-ended thinking, and it's full of margin for error or narrowing down and making things clearer. I would like to clean up this thinking a bit for you. But maybe we can do this in the Q&A, right? So because we're really running out of time. Here I will just ask if anything of this, license thinking metaphorically or practically in the social relations that you experience on your field, in your community, in your workplace, in your, kinship, family back home. Well, how does that maybe speak to you? It would be nice if we could stick a bit to the idea of an action research license in your field or in our, so that we can stay a bit more on the topic of today. But the questions there would be how and what are you feeling able to socialize, to what extent, and what shall you instead protect? And so from whom? What is the fear at stake, right? So we move from a logic of agreeing and making consensus and that is staying horizontal and not going vertical to a more playful logic of relating. This was sort of our proposition for today. I hope it was helpful. Sorry for the rush again. I'm looking forward to the Q&A and to the next presentation. I heard there's an interesting format too.